I want to thank everyone for allowing me the opportunity to come down here and talk a little bit about returns. So Amanda actually called me a couple of months ago and concerned about the number of returns I had sent back recently. And so I did a little bit of digging. I took over Virginia in mid 2018 after the retirement of longtime reviewer Patrick Andrews, who had had Virginia for as long as I know. Since that time, we've had roughly 250 nominations from Virginia come into me, and I have returned 37 of them. That's roughly 15%. I did a look at the overall rate of returns for the past 3 years at the Park Service, and that's actually on par. I think it's like 12.8% have been returned, and there's a number of reasons for that. Carol may be able to back me up a little on this, because when I hired into the National Register in 2007, prior to that, a decision had been made that not all nominations got substantive reviews. So nominations got a technical review first, and if there were issues, technical issues, or if there were certain categories of nominations claiming national significance, nominations for less than 50-year-old properties, moved properties, any of those more tricky situations, those automatically got substantive review. But that meant that a large number of them were not getting substantive review. They were getting purely a technical review. And Carol, if I recall, way back in the day, every nomination was read by multiple people. And then eventually the states, said to the Park Service, hey, we've been doing this a while. We know what we're doing. And we went down to the system where it was a percentage of the nominations actually got substantive review, and the rest of them were assumed to be correct. So a lot of listings only had a technical review. When I got Virginia from Patrick said, oh, this will be no problem for you. Then I looked back at the record. So you were averaging 50 nominations per year for the 10 years prior to Patrick leaving. Patrick was seeing 11 of them a year, and he might have returned 2 of those. So you're still talking around 15% of what was getting substantively reviewed. When I took on Patrick's states, my job situation was such that I had time to do 100% substantive review. I used to also do a program called the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act program. That went away from me, which freed me up to do what I like to do, which is read nominations. So I do 100% substantive review for every state. So that equates to 750 nominations per year that I review and comment on. And I will often give comments back to states, especially states that are a little more problematic, on the ones that I list as well. I will say, this was good. Here's what could have made it better. And I can do that for Virginia, if you would like, for the ones that I accept. But that's really where we are on why about 15% of your nominations have been returned since 2018. So another great thing about this process, conversely, is for years we had talked about going to a fully electronic nomination process, and COVID made us finally do that. Instead of hemming and hawing and figuring out how we're going to do it, COVID made us do it. So that meant that nominations were coming in electronically, which also meant that I get to spend more time with the nominations. When the nominations were coming in paper and they were routed through the control unit and given their technical review and then put in their drawer, It may be 20 days into the 45-day clock. It may be 30 days into the 45-day clock. It may be 40 days into the 45-day clock before I physically got to look at the nomination. So by coming in with a larger review window, I give all my nominations a quick read early in the process. I wait for the required 15-day public comment period after the Federal Register, and then I go back and I look at them more closely. So that allows me to A, know which ones are going to be problematic ahead of time, and B, to catch technical problems that we may be able to fix. So there are any number of nominations that I've worked with either Lena or Amanda with in the past few years that in the old days, when they were paper documents, we would have had to have returned because there were problems, you know, boxes not checked, signatures not on there, problems with maps that we have been able to fix in the interim time since we're now doing them technical. I will point out issues, you know, you forgot to fill out this box, or you forgot to not fill out this box. And I'll call up Amanda and send her an email, say, hey, can you either change this and send me a new copy, or I can edit this document and fix the problem. So we've actually saved a lot of back and forth via formal returns through this new electronic process. So when I return something, it's either going to be a substantive problem or a technical problem that I can't fix, like the map is wrong, things that I can't literally go in and erase and re-edit. So what we can't fix are substantive problems. If it involves a criterion that is claimed and not supported, if it involves an area of significance or areas of significance, period of significance, or a level of significance that are not supported, I can't fix those with an SLR or through a back and forth. They have to go back. They are substantive issues that get to the heart of why the property was important in the first place. I tend to be a lot more lenient when it comes to level of significance if it's local or state, because frankly, it has no real material effect. But if you're going to claim national significance, you need to give me that context that demonstrates that property is nationally significant. And I also cannot do anything with boundary issues. So that, you know, a boundary problem is always going to be a substantive problem. So substantive is, does this materially affect an evaluation of significance, of eligibility? So looking back at the returns that I've done since mid-2018, at what are the commonalities? And the commonalities are problems with what are referred to as the associative criteria. That's criteria A and B. Criterion C, the physical qualities of the property. We will have some problems with some of those, and those may be in conjunction with other problems that are associative, but it's primarily criterion A, sometimes B, and the reasons are both of them require a direct and important association between the event or person and the subject property. So when I see in the summary statement of significance, the opening paragraph, or in the first paragraph of the narrative, the words representative or example of, that is a red flag right away. Every building, every property is an example of something. Everything represents something, but how is it important? How is it an important example? What are the important associations? So that's what I'm going to look for in the nomination. You said that this building is significant because it's representative of commercial activities in such and such a town. Well, every commercial building is representative of commercial activity. So I'm going to look into that narrative that you've supported why the commerce associated with this building is of sufficient importance, or that there is something about it that stands out above other similar commercial entities. So that's where the little idiom at the bottom here, function does not equal significance. So just because something is commercial buildings, just because farm is a farm, does not imbue it with significance in commerce or in agriculture. We're trying to winnow out the chaff of what places are important in our history versus what places existed in our history. Second aspect is the ability of the property to convey that significance. So that's where the historic integrity aspect comes in. And in one of the examples, we'll demonstrate how integrity of a property, of a person, a criterion B, the importance of the person may have been there, but the property itself may not be able to convey that person's significance. So the root causes are the lack of context, the evaluative context in which to judge whether a property is important or not. And a lot of people don't ask what context is, and what it is three things working together: a theme, a time, and a place. If I'm looking at a bridge, I'm looking at the context of transportation or engineering. If it's a covered bridge, we're looking at 19th century transportation and engineering. And we may be looking at a level of significance that's purely local. This was an important cog in the transportation system for this part of the state. Or at a higher level, this is one of the most outstanding examples of a Burr arch, multi-arch covered bridge. So what is the theme that we're looking at? If you're going to claim significance in agriculture, I need to know what is it about agriculture in this particular area, this place, was important during the 19th century, during this time, and then relate the physical characteristics of that property to that context. So one of the most common problems is there is no context. There is a lot of factual information about the property that does not tell me anything other than factual information about the property. It doesn't place it within that greater context. We're always going to need some level of comparison between properties. You know, what is it about this particular one that's important? What other examples are there out there? It doesn't have to be exhaustive, but what I'm looking for is that the nomination author has thought about this, that they have looked at this property and said, well, you know, this is an Italianate style house in, you know, Anytown, Virginia. I want to know a general idea of, was the Italianate a popular style in that town? How many other examples are there, roughly? I don't need to know each and every one. What I want to know is, have we looked at others? And this goes to the wording of the criterion when you're looking at criterion C, property. Embodies the distinctive characteristics of a period, type, or method of construction, work of a master, and then, you know, historic districts. So what are the distinctive characteristics? Are these characteristics something that you find in other properties in this area? So is this one that best embodies those characteristics? It may be that Anytown, Virginia doesn't have a great deal of high style Italianate, but it's obvious that Italianate reflects an important development period in that community. That maybe there weren't, you know, the pattern book or architect design examples, but people recognize that this is a fashionable style and they built those buildings. Well, in Anytown, You may have an Italianate that embodies the distinctive characteristics within the context of any town that taken to Richmond would just be just another house. So helping me to understand what that local context related to that theme is important, because I don't go to these places. I go there virtually, but I don't know Virginia intimately. I don't know West Virginia intimately. I don't know Vermont intimately, but I review all of these states. So I have to learn from the document why the property is important. So don't assume that I know things that you know as the author or as the reviewer. I don't know that. So tell them to me. So when I return nomination, I send formal comments written up on letterheads. It's a formal exchange between me and the State Preservation Office, and I send them. Now I send them to Amanda for now. And what I do is I try to acknowledge that the property is likely eligible, but what has not been supported. So it may be in the nomination that criterion C is supported, but criterion A isn't supported. And then I give them a path forward. So I will say, if you want to try to support criterion A, here are some questions that I would like to see answered. Or you could drop criterion A and resubmit it, and we'll list it under criterion C. Because it does only take one criterion, one area of significance. And understandably, this shows the push and pull of our program. The goal is, obviously, to recognize historic places. And the ideal goal, is to recognize all potential areas of significance for any property. So the phrase telling the full story, that's a wonderful goal, but a lot of times the work necessary to tell that full story and support a National Register criterion or area of significance is beyond the capability of the person who's writing the nomination. So while in an ideal world, the nomination will be direct and focused on what the claim of significance is. This is a position paper saying this is important for these reasons, and here is the support for that position. A nomination is also a repository of information. So if you need or feel that the property deserves to have more story told about the property, that has associations that may not be fully supportable as areas of significance, I'm fine with that being in the nomination. But if you're going to claim an area of significance, you need to support that area of significance. I have read many nominations that are criterion C nominations for the architectural style or type of the property that have complete family histories that is irrelevant to the topic at hand. And for that nomination author, that property owner, that's a great thing, because they get to put all this information into a document, an official document, and record it. It may be the only place that it's recorded. I am fine with that, so long as the defense of your claim of significance is clearly stated in the nomination. So if you have a property that has, it's nominated for its architectural history, it has historic associations with African-American slavery, but there are no resources left with that, it's fine to include all of that story in there. But if you're going to claim significance in ethnic heritage or some other aspect of that history, there needs to either be documentary support, You need to tell me how it meets that criteria of significance. And there needs to be something on the ground or under the ground that reflects that conveys that significance. So we're in this never-ending tension of wanting to be all-inclusive of information, and I'm for that, but we still have to remain focused on the task at hand, which is supporting why this is significant. And sometimes you may not have the capacity to do that. Sometimes you may have it, it's just going to take a lot longer. And that's the great thing about these nominations is once I accept it, it's not done. You can amend a nomination at any time in the future. Secretary was directed to establish and maintain a national register. That's the words of the law, and maintenance includes updating older documentation to recognize other areas of significance, other periods of significance. So be all end all is not necessarily just to get it listed, but that is the eventual goal. So Amanda asked me to bring up a couple of examples. I'm going to walk over there and get my water because I'm talking a lot. So I chose 4 of recent nominations that I have returned. 2 of them have come back. 1 of them I've actually looked at. I still haven't got to Pennington Gap yet. But we're going to go through these real quickly on what the issues were. St. Paul's Episcopal Cemetery in Alexandria. You see the green square there? This is St. Paul's Episcopal Cemetery. If you notice, it is surrounded by a lot of green space, which is also cemeteries. Nomination was submitted only under one criterion, criterion C, and the area of significance was art, or the funerary art. And the period of significance was 1809 to 1972, 1972 being roughly the 50-year cutoff. So that immediately catches my eye. Having some affinity for cemeteries and understanding the history of iconography and art. Coming up to 1972 in funerary art, immediately a red flag to me. The nomination comes in section 8, gave me a really good amount of information about specific artisans, in particular one artisan who had a lot of examples of work in the Episcopal Cemetery. The narrative and the descriptive narrative focused primarily on 19th century markers and monuments, some statuary, some really, really good stuff. Talked a lot about the associated businesses in the area who had people who worked for them whose names appeared as the carvers on the markers. Provide a history of the development of the site, the acquisition of it by the Episcopal Church. Talked a lot about people buried in there. The important people, including the stranger, the whatever the
museum
story in Alexandria is, who were buried within that cemetery. So what was missing in the nomination? First of all, at no point did they acknowledge that the cemetery is just one of many cemeteries that are contiguous together. So the nomination was entirely focused on part of it owned by the church. It didn't tell me, it didn't acknowledge it, what makes this particular section of this larger burial ground, burial landscape significant. I've been to that cemetery a million times, and frankly, I can walk from one end to the other and not tell the difference. I don't know I'm going from one cemetery to the other because there's nothing obvious. There is no obvious change in the markers, it's a continuum of historic burials from the basically late 18th century through the current period. So obviously there was no comparative analysis. When they were talking about the historic markers and the high artistic values of the markers in there, they didn't even mention markers in other adjacent cemeteries. They didn't justify a period of significance going up to 1972. The focus was on 19th century iconography and the artisans involved with that. There was no discussion, general discussion of the evolution of markers, materials, forms, shapes, the actual carvings on there from the pre-Victorian through the Victorian up to the more modern times. There was no discussion of that, no discussion of the transition from hand carved markers to machine carved markers and what that meant. No discussion of the 20th century at all. So it was returned. And what did I tell them they should do? They should nominate the entire complex. And in doing so, they can focus just on the 19th century art, which there are outstanding examples of 19th century religious and cemetery art in the entire collection of cemeteries there. So not just the Episcopal Cemetery, but all the cemeteries collectively. And recently I have spoken with people associated with the city of Alexandria who think that maybe that is a good idea. And hopefully, rather than just this particular individual nomination coming in, I will get a nomination for the entire complex. Pennington Gap, this is fairly recent. This would have been before you, the previous meeting. So Pennington Gap is a community in southwestern Virginia. Nomination comes in 3 areas of significance, all under criterion A: commerce, entertainment, recreation, transportation, with a period of significance from 1890 to 1973. So this came in late 2023, so the 50-year cutoff. Commerce is almost a no-brainer when I look at these small town commercial districts, because that's the easiest thing in there. So all of these are criterion A. Nomination did a really nice job in the history of the town, why the town exists, the development of the town, the relationship of the town to extractive industries, the relationship of the town to the rail line and eventually the highways that came down here. So how and why Pennington Gap became a commercial node, the place where not only the people in the town, but the people around the town came to transact for goods and services, was well established. This is commercially significant. What was not established were entertainment, recreation, and transportation. So in entertainment recreation, the sole property associated with that theme is a theater. Theater in the downtown. A theater is, yes, it is a venue for entertainment and recreation. It is also a commercial venue. So it falls under that general rubric of commerce. It talked a lot about other resources in the entertainment recreation theme. Bowling alley, a miniature golf course, baseball field. None of these things are in the district though. So the district doesn't convey significance associated with things that are not within the district's boundaries. Now, an area of significance can be claimed for an individually eligible or listed property. So let's say that theater had been listed 10 years ago under entertainment recreation. They had provided a nomination that fully describe the interior and exterior of the building and put it within that context, then that area of significance carries on the form into the district. I could have accepted that. But in order for us to claim entertainment recreation for one building within a much larger district, you really need to explain why that one building has individual importance. And in doing so, you have to do more of critical analysis of both its importance in entertainment recreation, which it may be, but also the building itself. So as we all know, in a historic district, we look primarily at the exterior of the buildings and how the exteriors reflect on the streetscape, their relationship to whatever the theme is. So we typically don't look inside a building in a historic district. But if we're going to claim individual importance and try to get entertainment recreation in there, I would need to know something about the interior. Does it still have an open theater space in it, or has it been cut up into apartments? That wasn't in the nomination. It was just, we have a theater, therefore entertainment recreation. Again, function doesn't necessarily equal significance. Transportation. The historic background and discussion of the development of Pennington Gap made it clear that transportation was a key for why this town existed and why it thrived. But there's no transportation related resources in the boundaries of the district other than a segment of the railroad track that went through. So is 400 feet of railroad track sufficient to convey transportation as an area of significance? Not really. You know, if there had been a depot in there, I could buy that, because the depot itself is a directly related to transportation in there. What the transportation aspect does is it sets part of the stage for why this was a commercially an important location. You were able now to move goods and services in and out and through whatever industries were in there, are able to transport their goods in and out. People could come and go via that transportation. So if there aren't any valid resources in the district associated with your claim of significance, you can't really claim that significance. You can take the information about that area of significance and maybe transform it as support for another area of significance, in this case, commerce. So you still need to have a direct and important association for transportation in order to claim transportation. This was another issue. So I'm going to read this highlighted portion. This is the last section in section 7, where before we get to the inventory, and this is explaining evaluations of integrity. Limited cases where the historic form or design of a building constructed within the period has been altered to such an extent that it no longer conveys its historic function or period of construction, the historic resource is identified as non-contributing. Alterations of this magnitude are limited and include significant changes to roof forms, changes to the size and or shape of historic window and door openings, and covering of the facade with non-historic materials such as stucco. This is great. I always look in my nominations for a justification for why something is contributing or non-contributing. What are the baseline things? So when I look at either the photographs or Google Street View, I can understand why this one does not contribute based on a level of change that you've identified in the nomination. So I go on Google Street View and I start looking at the downtown. And what is the first thing I notice? Roofs. Pointer on here. Notice all the gabled roofs. Gables, gables, gables. Gable, 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 big gable. shed roof, gable, gable, gable. None of this is mentioned in the nomination. There's not a single sentence that talks about the number of gabled roofs that are added to flat roof buildings. So there's no discussion of their integrity. Yet I go back here and it says alterations of this magnitude include significant changes to roof forms. So that's right there a problem. But look at this one. Windows enclosed, window enclosed and shortened. So a lot of what I'm seeing on the ground contradicts what it says in the nomination. I copied it, I printed out the map, and then I put marks for every building in the district that has an altered roof line. There's only like 7 that don't have altered roof lines in the district. So I would expect that to be brought up in the nomination. So do these alterations affect the ability of the district to convey its importance in commerce? Not necessarily. These may not be fatal changes, but they are changes and they need to be acknowledged. You need to explain how these changes to these former typical flat roofed commercial buildings impact its ability to convey its significance in commerce. So historic integrity is a sliding scale. There are 7 aspects of integrity, and which aspects of integrity should be prioritized is dependent on why it's significant. My immediate thought was, this is Southwest Virginia. These roofs all look to be of a similar age. Was there a weather issue, heavy snow loads that may have caused a couple of roofs to collapse? And building owners decided, hey, let's put some sloping roofs on our building so this doesn't happen again in the future. Well, that's all part of the continued commercial importance. We're trying to keep our downtown viable. We're trying to keep our businesses viable. This is a change that does not impact the criterion A significance. So what I would like to see, and in my return comments, that's what I asked for. When did these changes occur? Do they occur basically at a period, or do they occur strung out over a long period? Were there precipitating events that led to this, and how does that affect our ability to convey importance? So it could be that these are valid and important aspect of the history, but you can't ignore it. It's there. Another one, and I told them you don't have to address this one in this nomination, but don't draw boundaries between buildings that are attached to each other. Logically, I can't see a line between these 2 buildings. Include the non-historic building in it and just call it non-contributing. One of the myths out there is that we look at percentages. That a district has to have 60% contributing resources. Well, that's not true. What we look at is the effect of the number of non-contributing resources on the ability of that district to convey its importance. An extreme example I have is one in North Carolina that had somewhere around 9 to 13 contributing resources and 430 non-contributing resources. But it was a battlefield with a subdivision that was built in it, a 10,000 acre battlefield with 100 acres that had been subdivided with intensely built out houses. So a whole bunch of houses in 1% of the larger landscape is not a significant impact on it. Numbers wise, if you look at percentages, you're going, well, it's not. So what we're looking for is what is that cumulative effect of non-historic, non-contributing resources on the district? And drawing a boundary, between two buildings that are physically and historically attached to each other just to get one less non-contributing doesn't make sense. Go with a natural break, a natural boundary, street, empty lot, parking lot, something like that, and just go ahead with the non-contributing. So this was a non-actionable thing in the becomes a substantive. Wasn't worth it. Pennington Gap could be listed as it is, just as long as you tell me something about groups and drop transportation as an area of significance. So that was my suggested path forward. Drop transportation. Tell me more about specifics of the theater, or drop entertainment recreation, and then address the roof alterations. Tell me when they happened, why they happened, and relate them to the significance of the district. At any time while I'm talking about these, if you have memories or specific questions. Yes.
I have a question. Are you allowed to approve in part and deny in part? So you could say yes on A, no on B, no on C.
Not really.
So you got to reject the whole thing.
I have to return it for substantive revision. So in the past, sometimes a reviewer might have written what's called a supplementary listing record, an SLR, that would say transportation was not supported in the nomination, is hereby removed as an area of significance. And our solicitor has told us we really shouldn't be doing that, that if there is a substantive change, it needs to be sent back. So, 15 years ago, yeah, would have probably just done that.
Hey, Jim,
Yes.
over here. What would you recommend if there is a whole block of connected buildings, row houses or commercial buildings, and say there's 10 of them, the first 2 are contributing and the next 8 are not? If you want us to include all 10 of them in the boundary?
If they're all connected, yes, I would. One thing that, if you consider that, consider why those are non-contributing, especially if it's because of, this is very common in commercial areas, because of slip covers, changes to the facade. By including them within the boundaries, and someone removes that or reverses your row house's concerns, then it's much easier to change the status from non-contributing to contributing than it is to do a boundary increase, which is a whole new world of nomination problems.
So in all my years in this field, we've always tried to eliminate non-contributing buildings on the periphery of a boundary because we thought that was required. But
if there's a break between the buildings, that's what I'm looking
Only if
for.
there's
So,
a break.
yeah, look right across the street there. You've got 2 buildings and you've got a new building, but there's a space in between them. Draw your line down that empty space. But if they're connected, it's not really logical to draw a boundary that splits a connected building.
thank you.
I always wondered, is this Airville or Aryville?
Airville.
Airville. Northampton County. So nomination was submitted to us under all 4 criteria, A, B, C, and D. an alphabet one, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas of significance: exploration, settlement, politics, government, industry, commerce, and architecture. So, quick question. What's missing out of that litany of areas of significance? Four criteria: A, B, C, and D.
There's archaeology.
Archaeology.
Exactly. Where's the archaeology?
Yeah.
You claim criterion D, but you don't have archaeology as an area of significance. So there's one flag. 4 significant persons. So 4 significant persons associated with a single property. Now, given that this property has a history back to the 17th century, there's a possibility, but always kind of raises my eyebrow when I see multiple persons of significance associated with a single property, because you have to justify all of them. Yes. I thought you raised your hand.
Oh, no,
No, never mind. Okay.
I can see this.
So here we have an aerial view of the property. We have a number of resources, historic buildings. We have a fairly rural look to the property. So it comes in under A, B, C, and D in exploration settlement related to early settlement and development of the area. And this is closely tied to the justification for the other criteria. So exploration settlement comes in for the property under A, but it also comes in for the property under B, or association with a significant person. Architecture for the main house and evolved federal era dwelling and 20th century additions. And then under criterion E, it's claiming both exploration settlement and architecture. But they forgot to mark archaeology as an area of significance. So anytime you have archaeology as an area of significance, it needs to have something that it's supporting. What is the archaeology telling us? In this case, they made a really good justification for the archaeology that has been done there and could still be done there. The potential to do further information that gave them good information about the analysis of the early architecture, 17th century architecture, and some of the 18th century architecture. It provided a good basis for the claims under exploration settlement because the number of resources associated with interactions between the occupants and Native Americans, early trade patterns, et cetera, et cetera. So everything in criterion D was there very well. Mike Roller, our archaeologist, looked at this, and eventually he gives you suggestions for other uses of the archaeology. So the persons of importance: John Howe, William Kendall, William Eyre, and Guy Webster. So the continuum of occupation: Howe for exploration and settlement, early period, and his importance in local politics in the colony. William Kendall, commerce. He was a tradesman and also politics and government. William Eyre in agriculture, and Guy Webster also in commerce. So there was ample support in the nomination for the 3 primary areas of significance: A, C, and D. The archaeology was used well to help support all of those areas of significance, which is, one of the things that we look for is archaeology isn't always just about archaeology. It's what you can learn from archaeology and relate it to the activities on the property. So what was missing is support under criterion B. Howe and Kendall, the 2 earliest occupants, had no above ground resources associated with them. The land itself was the only thing to them. So the ability of the property to convey its historic associations under criterion B for those 2 gentlemen is not exhibited in anything that you can see there. So our suggestion was recouch your argument using criterion B or D, the lens of archaeology. So referencing, Mike suggested that the author look at Bulletin 38 again, guidelines for evaluating archaeological properties. So that this was part of his write-up coming back. Where appropriate in the nomination discussions of criterion B, emphasize the ways that the particular character of remaining archaeological resources, be it architectural remains or material culture, illustrates or conveys those contexts cited under B. So what are those features or artifacts that relate to early exploration, that relate to a position as an important man of commerce? What aspects of the physical remains show that this person was a person of an elevated enough class that they are likely to have political influence in the colony? For example, John Howe's described as locally significant in the areas of exploration, settlement, politics, government. The post and ground structure is intimately illustrative of the significance of his role in the early English settlement of remote area of the Virginia colony and, more generally, the adaptations made by the colonists. As for Kendall, his success in commerce could be reflected in the material changes made to the property, the new brick house, which the foundations were found, and the material goods accumulated. So this was part of our return comments. Here's how you can take the information that you have and use it to support one of the criteria that you haven't really supported because there are no other resources associated with this person. So what was missing was the significance of the last two owners, Eyre and Webster. For Eyre, significance is not established in agriculture. So the justification for him as important in agriculture seemed to be based on the fact that two publications mentioned him as a horse breeder, one of which was something that he wrote himself. So, you know, the little self-aggrandization on what a great job he does in producing quality horses. So there was no context, no agricultural context, no context on animal husbandry in which to evaluate his importance in that area. And secondarily, there were no agricultural lands in the boundary. So if you're going to not nominate a property under agriculture, we need to have some agricultural resources that are associated with that agriculture, be it the land or historic agricultural buildings. For Webster, the significance might be there. He was significant again in commerce. What his significance was in canning. He had a large cannery about 1.5 miles away from his property. And the nomination talks quite a bit about how he used his property to grow vegetables under tenancy or some other arrangement that were then used in his cannery and shipped across the country. So he may have importance in commerce, but criterion B requires a nomination to examine what the properties best associated with that significance are. So you need to look at the actual commercial industrial property, the cannery. Does it still exist? Again, that commerce was based on agricultural products, that they went to a great deal of effort to talk about how he used his own land, but we did not include any of that land. We included only the homestead itself, the small area. Now, his success did lead to him to do major renovations to the property to bring it into its current state with the colonial revival additions, all of which are articulated in the criterion C nomination. And they may be supportive of his significance under criterion B in commerce if you go through the efforts to identify other associated properties. But they didn't. So we know the cannery is there. We know at least part of it is there. So I would have liked to have seen them talk about that and explain why the house is a better representative of him than his actual commercial business is. So criterion B is actually, to me, the hardest criterion to make, because you have to first establish that the person is important. Not just famous, but important. And then you have to look at all the properties associated with them during that period of importance, and then evaluate which one or ones, because it could be more than one, best reflect that. So if you know our criteria considerations, we don't do birthplaces or graves unless there are no other properties to associate it. Well, this carries it to, that period when they achieve their importance. What is the place? Why are they important? And what are the places best associated with it? So in this case, we had 4 people initially submitted. It was winnowed down to 2. So the nomination was resubmitted and accepted last Friday, actually, under criterion B for the 2 earliest occupants, because they took the time to take the archaeological information and transform that into support for the criterion B. It was probably decided that it would be a little bit too much work to do the Webster look at other associated properties, so drop it. Leave his history in there, leave his story in there, and relate it to why the house looks like it does. And then Air, because it's named Airville, leave his story in there, but he doesn't have to be associated in criterion B. So provide more information on the significance of air in agriculture. If you do that, you're really going to have to reconsider boundaries. Again, probably not going to happen. Provide more information on other properties associated with Webster, or drop both and drop the associated areas of significance. So we ended up dropping industry because there are no properties associated with Webster's industry there. And then please add archaeology as an area of significance. You supported it, you use it, might as well add it. And then use some of the information to help support B. So that was the path forward. They took that path and resubmitted it, and Mike signed it on Friday. So I was a little off on that. Last one is one I threw in here. This was a couple of years ago. And I saw your hand up. Maybe not.
No, it's itching.
Stop shaking.
I gotta stop moving my hands.
I'm talking. Peripheral vision isn't great. Gascony,
Scratch my-
Cumberland County came in under criteria A and C in agriculture and architecture with a period of significance 1856 to 1965. Under criterion A, Gascony is locally significant in the area of agriculture as an example of a 19th century plantation that continues to be used as an agricultural estate. So right there, my eyes got big. Property is also locally significant in criterion C in the area of architecture for its circa 1856 Greek Revival style main house with mid 20th century colonial revival additions and its collection of vernacular outbuildings. So open it up and I always go to the map first. I'm a geography guy. So I like to look at the map. I notice we have here a discontiguous district. So we have the large section of the property here and a smaller section here separated by who knows what. Look at it on here and we see that it's separated by fields. So that immediate question comes up. What was I questioning? Anyone?
Why was that field not included?
Right, why? Why do we have discontiguous? Because it's under different ownership. So immediately say, well, that's not the historic association. was a much larger area. Don't draw boundaries based simply on ownership. Draw boundaries based on full extent of the historic property as it is associated with the criteria or area of significance. So it comes in under criterion A, and there is no agricultural context. Basically, the statement was, it's an example of a farm that began in the 19th century and continues to be a farm. Look at the outbuildings themselves. Okay, sometimes a good collection of outbuildings can convey agricultural importance. So it's not always necessary to have associated agricultural land. But these were all post-World War II, post-1940, actually, outbuildings. So when the discussion of it as a 19th century farm that continued to serve, well, yeah, the farmland itself was, but the resources on the property really reflect a different period of time. When they talked about the house in 1856 Greek Revival with mid-20th century colonial revival additions, well, that's telling me that we're looking at a property that didn't just evolve, it changed in the mid-20th century. So I'm going to start looking at it through that lens. What are the things that support significance of that property in that period, that post period? It doesn't mean we have to ignore the earlier part, but I don't want to see the emphasis on the earlier part. I want to see the emphasis on the period that is reflected in the resources that are actually on the ground. So in discussing agricultural use and its importance, literally there was no context. So there was no discussion of the land use. What were the crops that were grown there? How did the land evolve? Did they do much clearing? Was it already cleared? Did they acquire it? Are there extant field patterns? You know, you can go on historic aerials and look at aerial images that sometimes date back to the 1930s and look at the patterns of the land. And a lot that will tell you a lot about the type of agriculture that's there. Are the historic field patterns still there? So at the time of the nomination, they are submitting 221 acres, but the nomination admits that it was 400 acres in the 19th century, and by the mid-century was down to 20 acres. And then after the mid-century, owners acquired some of their land back to the present 221 discontiguous acres that they had submitted to us. So there was no justification for the boundaries that they chose. They chose it simply because this is the land that we own now. Even though the rest of the land in the immediate vicinity was still agricultural in use and had historic associations to the agriculture that was done there, even up to the 1940s. Under criterion C, they said it's significant. It's 1856 Greek Revival style meeting house with mid-20th century colonial additions and its collection of vernacular outbuildings. So looking at the narrative, we see that, yes, 1856, that was probably the date of construction for the house. In the 1940 additions to the house, including a change on the front porch, and 1940 is when the outbuildings were constructed. And then in 1965, 2 wings added to the property. So that's your period of significance ending in 1965. What they gloss over entirely is in 2008, a large addition and the changes to the interior, which were evidenced through the photographs of the inside of the house. So I just went on Google Earth and did the Wayback Machine in 2007. If you can see here, I don't know if you can see well, this is the footprint of the house. 1856, 2 one-story wings. Footprint of the house currently. 1856, 2 wings that have now been extended and a large extension out there, and then other buildings and a pool put in. Not even mentioned in the nomination. So this is a look at the side where you can see the extension on the one-story wing and then the extension of the rear wing. And then this is it from the rear showing us those extensions out here. Is this really reflective of an 1856 building? Is it even reflective of the Colonial Revival 1965 building? For individual eligibility versus, let's say this was done to a building in a historic district. It's all on the rear. It's not really visible from the street. Could that building still contribute? Probably, because the rhythm of the streetscape is still there. It still has that reflection of its 1965 appearance. But when taken as a whole, as a building worthy of individual recognition, they have doubled the square footage through additions on this building. It no longer really reflects its 1856, 1940, or 1965 appearance. It is a 2008 building. So what was missing from this nomination? Any agricultural context, any description of the land. No justification for the boundaries. No discussion of the effects of the 2008 additions or alterations, because they did stuff to the interior of the older part of the building as well to accommodate this new look. And any discussion of the context for 1940s era outbuildings. You know, I'm willing to bite that important agriculture was going on there, but since I know nothing about the role of this farm in local agriculture and what they were doing in the 1940s that caused them to build all these new outbuildings and demolish all their old outbuildings, maybe it was an accident, maybe it was new equipment. We're now using mechanized equipment and we need new buildings to accommodate that. You could have sold me on it, but they didn't sell it to me. So that's really what the nomination process is. You're selling me an argument and I need to be able to buy it. I need to kick those tires and I need to be able to understand why this place is important. So what did I suggest? Provide me an agricultural context, especially in the 20th century. Maybe drop criterion C. You know, this 2008 addition to it, maybe it's not architecturally important. Maybe it did have an adverse effect on it. But when taken as a whole for an agricultural landscape that includes a multiple outbuildings and including maybe a tenant house on there, those changes don't really affect it because we're looking at that larger picture under criterion A rather than criterion C. All right, where are we time-wise?
15. So you've got another 40, 30 minutes
Okay.
or plenty of time for questions.
Yeah. So summary, if you claim significance under multiple areas of significance, provide a context and justification. So if you're telling me something's agriculturally important, you got to tell me about the agriculture of the land and how this particular property fits into it. Make sure that it's a direct and important association. So form or function does not equal significance. You have to tell me why this is important. That's the question I ask every nomination I open up is why is this significant? And at the end of it, you don't want me to ask myself, so what? You want me to say, okay, I buy that. Nominate the full extent of the historic property as it relates to the area or the areas of significance. So it's okay to nominate a farmhouse without including all the agricultural land if you're nominating the farmhouse for its architecture. It's not okay to nominate a farmhouse under criterion A and say it's a good example of the type of farmhouses that were built here that show a successful farmer without telling me or including any agricultural land. So the The property nominated must convey the significance of your claim of significance. So that is the applying the 7 aspects of integrity. What are the 7 aspects of integrity, you ask? Anyone here want to tell me? Amanda, can you tell me?
Materials, workmanship, feeling, association, location,
Feelings,
yeah.
Setting.
design.
Setting.
It's still one more.
So there's 7 aspects of integrity. Not every property has to have all 7 aspects. You prioritize based on why the property is important and how does it convey its significance. So if you're going to nominate a property under criterion C for the physical qualities of its style, your priority is going to be design, materials, and workmanship. Location, setting depends sort of on the property, what the type of property is, and then feeling. But association, I mean, that can kind of go away. We move properties under criterion C that no longer have any association with their historic location or that. The setting should be similar. Doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be conducive for you to understand the history of that property. But it needs to have materials, design, and integrity. If you're looking at criterion A, location, that's where that event occurred. Criterion B, the same thing. This is where that person achieved their importance. So location is a primacy. Design, I have to understand that this was a commercial building and this man or this activity was commercial, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a pristine example of that particular type of building. So think critically, or when you read your nominations, do they address the area, the significance critically as it associates or reflects the historic associations? And I can never pimp the publications enough. It's sometimes good to go back and review the bulletins, particularly bulletin 15, how to apply the criteria, and 16, how to complete the form. Now, I will say that we are literally in the beginning process of updating bulletin 15 now. So staff is working on that in-house, and that is on our work plan for the next year to pump out a new edition of bulletin 15 that takes into account many of the problems that we see with nominations, the application of the criteria, and to make it more clear on how to translate that application to a property and eventually into a nomination. All right, I've exhausted my pictures, I think. Maybe not. I have one more picture. Do you have any questions?